last week we finished Mark chapter 1. And today we are starting with Mark chapter 2. And of course, just a quick recap, Mark is considered the action gospel because it doesn't focus a lot on things that Jesus said, but more on what Jesus did. Now we start with Mark chapter 2, starting in verse 1. And again, he entered into Capernaum after some days. And it was noised that he was in the house. And straightway many were gathered together, insomuch there was no room to receive them. No, not so much as about the door. And he preached the word unto them. And they came unto him, bringing one sick of the palsy, which was born of 4. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was. And when they had broken it up, they let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay. Mark chapter 1, verse 28 said that after a dramatic rescue of a demon-possessed man, immediately his fame spread throughout all the region from Galilee. At this point in his ministry, Jesus attracted crowds wherever he went. Well, if you think about it, if you know that you could have your sicknesses healed, that you have a child that is blind, or you're blind, or you're lame, and he can actually heal you. He doesn't just pray for you. He can literally take care of you, then you're immediately healed. People wanted to bring everybody. You had people that were sick. You had also people that wanted to see it. That would have been something to see. Someone you knew who couldn't walk, who was blind, and here comes Jesus, and he heals them, lifts them up, and they're walking just like everybody else. That was something to see. It was a spectacle, to be sure. Mark doesn't tell us what Jesus preached, yet he still emphasized the preaching ministry of Jesus as he did in Mark chapter 1, 28 and Mark chapter 1, 38 through 39. Stedman would write, it's clear that he was avoiding the streets because they had been turned into a healing campaign. Everywhere he went, people besieged him with requests for healing and the casting out of demons, so that he was unable to do what he had come to do primarily, which was to preach the word of God. Because of the crowded room, the friends of the paralyzed man had to lower him down through the roof. This was an unusual way to interrupt a sermon. Can you imagine that you're sitting here listening to preaching, all of a sudden you hear screeching on the roof, and you think, is it squirrels? No, that's too large to be squirrels. Is it a raccoon? It's way too large to be a raccoon. And all of a sudden you see the rope peel away and see people looking in at you. And here they go. They put this guy on some rope and they start lowering down. I tell you what, that guy had to have faith in his friends, because I tell you what, I wouldn't let any of my friends lower me down. They dropped me. They said, whoops. Well, hey, it's Jesus. He can fix you. It's like, boom. Yes, I know. But, these guys, they were determined to get their friend healed. The roof was unusually accessible. The roof was usually accessible by means of an outside stairway and was made of thatched dirt and tile laid over beams. It could be taken apart, and the friends of the paralyzed man lowered their friend down to Jesus. Such a rendering is entire. Morgan, when saying the word, they uncovered the roof. Such a rendering is entirely misleading. The force of the word is that they broke up the roof of the house, tearing off the fabric in order to lower the man down on his pallet into the presence of Jesus. In other words, it wasn't just they took a tile, laid it neatly. They were ripping that thing apart as quickly as they could. I'm like, I feel bad for the house owner.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you better pick. And so Jesus, you healed him. Now I need you to fix the roof. This proved the determination and faith of the friends of the paralytic man. They counted on Jesus healing their friend because it would have been a lot harder to bring him back up through the roof than to lower him down. They counted on him walking out of the room. And I was saying, that's some good friends for you.
Yeah.
I mean, because you have to think about it. If you ever, even y'all lifting the kids, they ain't light.
Exactly.
Now imagine trying to have to lift Bella It's like, lift, because they don't tell you how big this guy was.
Yeah.
And knowing that they had to hold this person up, they put him over his shoulder, they're going up the stairs to the side of the building, then getting on top of the roof, and then having to get the roof pulled apart, and then they're hoisting him down. That was a lot of effort and was not easy. Because like I said, they didn't know if Jesus would heal him or not. If they dropped him, he could have killed him. So they had a lot of faith that Jesus would do what he said he could. When Jesus saw their faith, he said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. But there were certain of the scribes sitting there, and reasoning in their hearts, Why doth this man speak blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God only? Jesus looked up at the 4 men struggling with crude ropes tied to each corner of the stretcher with the paralyzed man on it. He looked at them and saw their faith. Their faith could be seen. Their bold, determined action to bring their friend to Jesus proved they had real faith. We can imagine how his friends on the roof felt. They went to a lot of trouble to see their friend healed of his paralysis. And now the teacher only wants to forgive his sins. We might imagine them shouting, No, he's paralyzed. We want him to walk, not to be forgiven. But of course, Jesus being Jesus knows what needs to be done. Yet Jesus knew what the man's real need was and what his greatest need was. What good was it if the man had 2 whole legs and walked right into hell? With them, wherever there is a problem, almost always, sin is the real problem. Jesus got right to that problem. Jesus did not mean that the paralyzed man was especially sinful, or that his paralysis was directly caused by sin. Instead, he addressed the man's greatest need and the common root of all pain and suffering, man's sinful condition. Forgiveness, as written by Worsby, is the greatest miracle that Jesus ever performs. It meets the greatest need. It costs the greatest price. And it brings the greatest blessing and the most lasting results. Who can forgive sins but God alone? The scribes used the right kind of logic. They correctly believed that only God could forgive sins, and they were even correct for examining this new teacher. Their error was refusing to see who Jesus is, God the Son, who has the authority to forgive sins. The words suggest a gradual intensification of the fault-finding mood. First, a general sense of surprise, then a feeling of impropriety. Then a final advance to the thought, why is this blasphemy? Why? This is blasphemy. Again and again during the life of Christ, the same dilemma was to reappear. It was, if he was not divine, then he was indeed a blasphemer. There could be no other way out. But Jesus was the Christ. Now moving on to verse 8. And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, Why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether it is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, Thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise, take up thy bed, and walk. But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. He saith to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise, take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose and took up the bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, We never saw it on this fashion. In a stunning moment, the scribes knew Jesus could read their evil hearts. This should have helped persuade them that Jesus really was God, having power to forgive sins. It is hard to know if Jesus perceived this by his divine nature or by his human nature with the spiritual gift of discernment or word of wisdom. Trapp finds scriptural basis for either approach. That is, by his deity, as 1 Timothy 3:16, Hebrews 9:14, or by his own spirit, as 1 Peter 3:18, not by inspiration, as 2 Peter 1, chapter 21. In other words, Jesus, no matter if it was coming of himself or of divine inspiration of God itself, as the Father, he was able to do what was needed. It didn't matter where it came from, he was performing. It is when they said, for men, both real forgiveness and the power to heal are impossible, but for God, both are easy. It is a logical assumption that if Jesus has the power to heal the man's disease, he also has the authority to forgive his sins. In a way, it was harder to heal the man than to forgive his sins, because forgiveness is invisible. No one could verify at that moment that the man was forgiven before God. Yet it could be instantly verified whether or not the man could walk. Jesus is willing to put himself to the test. Jesus also met the scribes on their own scholarly ground. The rabbis had a saying, there is no sick man healed of his sickness until all his sins have been forgiven him. To the Jews, a sick man was a man with whom God was angry. Jesus often referred to himself with this title, Son of Man. The idea is not of perfect man or ideal man or common man, but a reference to Daniel chapter 7, 13 through 14, where the coming King of Glory, coming to judge the world, has the title Son of Man. Jesus used this title often because in his day it was a messianic title free from political and nationalistic sentiment. Jesus could have more commonly referred to himself as King or Christ, but those titles in the ears of his audience sounded like the one who would defeat the Romans. Son of Man was Christ's favorite designation of himself to claim to be Messiah in terms that could not easily be attacked. Imagine the tension in this scene. The scribes were tense because Jesus challenged them and said he would demonstrate he was the Son of God. The paralyzed man was tense because he wondered if Jesus really would heal him. The crowd was tense because they sensed the tension of everyone else. The owner of the house was tense because he wondered how much it would cost to repair his roof. And the four friends were tense because they were getting tired by now. The only one not tense was Jesus, because he had the perfect peace when he said, "Arise, take up your bed and go to your house." The man was immediately healed. The power of Jesus to heal and the authority to forgive sins were immediately vindicated. And you have to think about this. It wasn't that this paralyzed man suddenly just could walk. Now you realize, if this person was paralyzed since he was a kid, his legs would have no muscle. They'd just be literally skin and bones. No muscle whatsoever. When Jesus healed him, he didn't just, the guy didn't get up and just limp out or was shaking. Like you've ever seen somebody who hasn't walked for a while, and like with Grandpa especially, when he started to try to walk again after not being able to for so long, he was very unstable and wobbly. No, this guy was not only able to get up, with his muscles were reformed, were powerful, that he had enough strength to pick up his bed and walk out. That's saying something. Yeah. It wasn't just a little bit. He wasn't partially healed. He was healed beyond what even he believed. I'm sure he thought that Jesus could heal me and that I could walk, but he thought he'd have to use a cane or be a struggle. But no, his legs were better than they were. He probably, if he was born this way, as if he had never been paralyzed ever before. Brand new set of legs. That's power right there. Now imagine if Jesus had failed. His ministry would be shattered. The crowd would slowly leave the house. The scribes would smile and say, "He can't heal or forgive." The men would struggle to pull up the paralyzed man, who looked more dejected and embarrassed than ever. The homeowner would look at his roof and think, this was all for nothing. But Jesus did not, nor could not fail, because all he needed to heal this man was his word. There is wonderful healing power in the word of Jesus, in the promises of Jesus for those who come to him in faith. This man came to Jesus in faith, even if it was the borrowed faith of his friends. "We never saw anything like this," the crowd shouted. Jesus carried the day, and the people were amazed to see the power of God in action. The experts in the law were hoist with their own petard. I have no idea what petard means, but there's that word. I guess they were basically closing their eyes. They were blinded by their own stubbornness. On their own stated beliefs, the man could not be cured unless he was forgiven. He was cured, therefore he was forgiven. Therefore, Jesus' claim to forgive sin must be true. Sadly, they would still refuse to believe. And that concludes this morning's lesson.